We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. Now, Dave, earlier we covered the Panama Canal situation, which is just a fascinating story of one-upmanship and geostrategic politics. It blows me away, but there is that geo element, as in that worldwide element. And so we've got Donald Trump hurtling towards the White House, becoming president again on January 20th this year. And he has made some very bold statements regarding the U.S. membership of international organizations. And I'm thinking here the UN, the WHO. What's the deal?
Well, I think he recognizes that the United Nations tends to favor all of the underdeveloped nations who contribute very little to the total welfare of the globe. And so that catering to those nations puts countries like the United States, Great Britain, France, the Western nations, the first world nations, at a disadvantage. So in other words, you're disadvantaging the very nations that can provide the real solutions to the problems that third world nations have. And yet they're the ones who pay the bills and are listened to least.
Yeah, I can actually, to some degree, I can see these third party nations, these non-Western developed nations point as in, well, we don't want a top down answer to things, but because you know they've got their own national pride, which of course every country should have, and they want to be solving the problems for themselves. But if the solution to that problem comes from either the expertise or, let's be clear, the cash outlay from another country, then you've got to pay the piper. And it does seem that how they could repay the piper for the solutions that are being provided through the U.S. taxpayer largesse, and obviously the U.K. taxpayer largesse, is they could perhaps support the U.K. and the U.S. in various congresses that they create within the UN and WHO. And the reason I really wanted to discuss this subject is because I found a fantastic speech that I think everybody is probably familiar with, but it's the A Time for Choosing speech by Ronald Reagan. He called it the speech, by the way, the speech. And that he was, this was 63 or 64, I think 64, and he was rallying for Barry Goldwater. And I copied and pasted the quote, and it's fantastic. But he says, quote, "I think we're for an international organization where the nations of the world can seek peace. But I think we're against subordinating American interests to an organization that has become so structurally unsound that today you can muster a 2/3 vote on the floor of the General Assembly among nations that represent less than 10% of the world's population. I think we're against the hypocrisy of assailing our allies because here and there they cling to a colony, while we engage in a conspiracy of silence and never open our mouths about the millions of people enslaved in the Soviet colonies in the satellite nations." Now, if we remove the word Soviet colonies there, I think that would apply just as well today, don't you, Dave?
Absolutely. 60 years later, Reagan has simply said truth, and truth tends to last the test of time. And I think too that what has happened to us most recently is, and I tend to be tough on third world nations because they tend to not represent the kind of discipline and structure that Western nations tend to tout. But at the same time, I have to tell you that the current administration and their willingness to foist woke ideologies on these people who actually do know the difference between men and women and have known for quite some time, and they take great offense at this. And so why should they listen to a United States who pushes stuff that they know is absolutely not true. So you have this dynamic working, these two things working at the same time. They have their own views of the world, which they push and want to have recognized as being legitimate. At the same time, they have a country like the United States who says, "Oh, by the way, we'll help you if you take on this notion that men are men and women are women and women can become men and men can become women." They think we're crazy, and of course they're true. They're right. That is crazy, but that's another aspect of the fact that we live in a time when we can't just go and make a single diagnosis with a single symptom, because that isn't the way it is.
It's strange that for decades now we've been thought of the evils of expansionism and colonialism, and yet there's this ideological colonialism taking place. It's this imposition of values and mores that come from, and let's be fair, these are not values that are held or shared by the vast majority of Americans, and yet they're being exported as a cultural imposition. And it's almost the same people who decry that Christianity was brought by the point of the sword are now reveling that a new ideology is being brought with essentially accept what we say as the gospel, or you don't get the money and you might die. And it's really, I don't really see the moral difference between the two.
Well, the reason you don't see it is because there is no moral difference between the two. And so what you end up having, and it's one of the reasons I think that, perhaps the principal reason that Donald Trump has little respect for the UN, WHO, those kinds of organizations, is that the very behavior that the United States prompts amongst the third world is the very behavior that they exhibit in WHO and the UN generally that causes Donald Trump to have less respect for them. But there are some organizations in the UN that absolutely deserve for the United States to withdraw its support. WHO is absolutely one of them. Honestly, can you imagine WHO comes to consensus on a way to treat, now the word consensus is the operative word, the way to treat a particularly dangerous pathogen, and the United States should just fall in line, as should England or all of the rest of the world. Well, oh yeah, great. Whatever you say, Burkina Faso, we're right along with you.
It's a dangerous form of science, isn't it? Science by consensus. This is the thing that's always bugged me about Barack Obama's very misguided statement about 93% of climate scientists agree, because it was never quite clear when that became the totem of what is it precisely that they agree on, to what extent do they agree. And now, as you say, under the new burgeoning rules of the World Health Organization, that there is a consensus approach to science, and that if there were a consensus approach to science, we wouldn't be cooking with fire.
That's right. That's exactly right. And nobody. What do you mean, rub two sticks together? No, we're not good.
Fire's dangerous. We've seen fire burn things. Let's go there. The majority agree. That's now what you're doing. That's your whole process. This is how you're going to save lives if there's a new deadly pathogen. We're going to continue this conversation, hopefully with less references to cavemen. After this short break, don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.